What's up, Bigger Pockets? Chris Lopez here. I got my co-host Terrance Doyle. Terrance, how you doing?
Chris, what's going on, man? It's great to sit on the same side of the table as you for once.
I know, it's a little different.
I'm looking at your left side now versus the front. Yeah, it's nice. It's a good change of view for me.
So it's a good day, then.
It's a great day.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
So we're doing another live Q&A here for the Multifamily Mentor Show. And we are officially launching the show this Thursday in 2 days on June 3rd. So make sure you check that out. But our guests today are actually here local to us in Denver. We've done deals with them, and they are very knowledgeable commercial mortgage experts. We've got William Foy and Marcus Davis with Spearhead Mortgage Company. So welcome, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. So quick background about you guys. You guys are commercial mortgage brokers. Real fast, what does that mean?
Brokers worked as an intermediary between the investor and the debt market. So for us, we partner with 100 different lenders, and we access those depending on what the priorities are of our clients, and we don't just put them into a product. So we can seek out the best terms for their priorities.
All right. And so we got one question for you guys before YouTube will start blowing us up. So what are the top questions that a investor should be asking their mortgage broker, the commercial lender? And I know you guys have I don't know what you call it, but the top five, something like, what should they be asking?
Yeah, so I'll kick that one off. Really, it kind of starts with the 5 C's of credit from a lender's perspective, and something for investors to know about and kind of look internally about within themselves for when they're entertaining an acquisition and how the creditors are going to look at them. And the 5 C's of credit, just to put them all out there, and then we can kind of touch on each one a little bit, would be cash flow, collateral, character, capacity, and capital. And so, obviously we can kind of start with the first one being maybe cash flow. And, that can be property dependent in the commercial world, but also from a personal level, is your income, covering the debt expenses you have as an individual. We can kind of switch off, I guess. Marcus, you want to take?
Yeah, the collateral, looking at the specific asset that's going to be acquired in this situation or refinanced. But we're going to be wanting to understand the cash flow of the property, the loan to value position of the property, and just the overall strength of the collateral.
Okay. And so as we're talking about the 5 C's, which investors should keep in mind, especially as they are getting into multifamily investing, this is stuff that investors should have prepared as they start talking to you and other commercial lenders. That's what we're talking about. Continue on with the 5 C's.
Yeah. So character is one. That's kind of what lenders will wrap their arms around you from a character perspective based on your FICO score. That's why they pull a credit report, make sure that you've paid obligations that you've signed up for in the past. That gives them a pretty good idea of whether you handle your business or not from a character perspective.
So let's pause right there, because I think that's an interesting difference between if I'm going to finance my personal home or a duplex versus a 200 unit or a 20 unit apartment building, right? Is that my credit is a big part of the interest rate in the term I'm going to get. And on a commercial, it looks like it's just 1/5 of the pie. Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So it matters both. It obviously drives your pricing from a residential lending perspective. How good of a risk are you for the lender to take on a residential property?
Right.
On a commercial property, I'd say it's kind of more of a pass fail. I mean, the pricing sort of is what it is, and then you either pass or fail on the FICO score. But that's really one way for the only way for a new lender to get comfortable with somebody out of the gate is to say, hey, have they paid their prior obligations? And they take that as a measuring stick for whether they're going to continue to do that in the future.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. I think that's something to really emphasize of why going bigger and sometimes commercial loans are sometimes easier than your personal residence. I mean, I can't tell you, just being self-employed my entire life, how difficult it has been sometimes to get a personal home loan. I mean, it's laughable, just like that. I mean, it's literally a 6-month. Last year during COVID, I was trying to refinance a personal home that I didn't even have a loan on, and just getting a refinance in the middle of COVID was insane, right? My personal home, my family lives there. Like, we're going to make the payments. We're not going to skip that. But that was more difficult. I probably did 10 multifamily loans in the time it took me to do one personal home refinance.
That's the truth.
And so,
of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the things I think is so attractive about commercial loans, is that it is more pass fail. And that's a really well said, is that, on your primary, it's everything, right? Do you have a W-2? Do you have a W-2 pay stub? And what is your credit? And in commercial, they're going to look at a bunch of other things that look at the total pie. And it's really more about the asset and the cash flow versus your personal credit. So I think that's something that I'd love to emphasize, and why commercial loans, more often than not, are much easier than your personal home, which most of the times is a nightmare. Go ahead. Anyways, we were on cash flow, collateral, character.
Yeah, I'm talking about conditions now.
Conditions.
It's probably never been more important than it is in today's world, just with COVID and everything. But conditions can be in everything from your current market conditions, income conditions, of course. But really, it's just overall market conditions. Are you getting are the rents you're asking for comparable in the market? A lot of the conditions will be cleared up through your appraisal report.
Okay. All right. So we're talking with William and Marcus of Spearhead Mortgage. So going through the 5 C's right now. Did we hit all 5 C's yet?
We got one left.
We got one left.
We'll hit capital real quick.
Yeah, okay.
That one's really just more about the down payment, where that's coming from. Does it show on your balance sheet? Do you have something upcoming with the 1031 exchange? Lenders, obviously, before they put much work into something, as do we want to know that, you're going to have the liquidity to put down on something, to make it kind of real, before we're spending wheels with lenders and making them go through the underwriting process on your behalf. Can
you expand on that a little bit? So, walk me through it. Let's say they don't have it in the bank. They don't have it in the market, in securities. Mm-hmm. Where are you guys looking? How do you guys get comfortable with that if it's not sitting in someone's bank account? Like people out there, they're syndicators, or maybe they're raising money from other people. What are some ways that other people can come up with that to get a lender comfortable?
Yeah, I would say the most interesting scenario we run into with capital is that syndication model, mm-hmm. where, hey, we're bringing a little bit, but we're raising the rest. As long as there's a story to tell there, we can certainly, move forward with that. It's obviously easier if it's just sitting on a balance sheet already, or if it's an upcoming 1031 exchange where, hey, we know we're getting X dollars out of this property. It's going to close on this day. That helps, but mm-hmm. syndications obviously get a little bit muddy, and we just kind of have to learn more about that and start selling that to the lender sort of on the front end.
And let's talk about that, because a lot of the audience here, watching this video, a lot of them are aspiring to do their first deal, their first syndication. I mean, I get this question as a broker a lot. I'm sure you guys get this question even more. They're like, hey, I'm putting this together. What's that structure look like? And how do you guys evaluate that? Because if I come to you as, hey, this is my first syndication, versus a Terrance Doyle comes to you with a lot under his belt, we're going to be valued differently, as we should. But what's that conversation like for a newbie, someone like myself doing the first commercial sponsorship deal, versus Terrance, who's got experience?
Well, I think the biggest factor that, or the conversation that comes up typically, is just understanding your risk through a personal guarantee. Most lenders on your first deal are going to be looking to take down a full personal recourse, a guarantee from any individual who has more than 20% of the equity involved in the deal. So I think that's important, and that's the conversation that probably comes up most. As far as do we care what those percentage slices are? We're really not that interested, as long as everybody understands the personal guarantee piece. And the individuals that do have more than 20% of that ownership, hopefully they can add to the underwriting file by, having personal income in place and all those other things of the 5 C's, right?
Yeah. And I'd say just adding to that, leverage matters to you on syndication deals, because there are non-recourse options that can be accessed at a certain loan to value. When you're trying to push leverage with a syndication deal, it gets really interesting, because who is going to, put together a personal guarantee? What is that total personal guarantee ownership percentage end up totaling? And just speaking in generalities, most lenders want to see at least 50% of the ownership in terms of a combined guarantee. So that can get really, that could be a struggle on a syndication deal. If the more, obviously you don't want to give away equity, but if you can lower the LTV at all, it brings up non-recourse options that, can then help solve.
It becomes slightly less complicated if it's your second deal and your third deal and you have more experience, because then that opens the channel to a lot of non-recourse type of financing. And then from there, we're not having these conversations as much. So none of that becomes important as far as the ownership positions in your equity stack.
But with the first deal, it can almost become a catch-22. I get past the first deal. It's the thing. Hey, we want someone with job experience.
Yeah.
They have to have a job first before you get experience. So that first, what recommendations do you have? Because I see a few questions out here, like how can someone prepare themselves as an operator and investor to start getting ready so they can come to like a group like you guys and say, I want to put together some partnerships and syndications. How can I look attractive, but it's my first deal? How can I get over this hump?
Can I get over this hump? I mean, being organized, right? Being able to tell your story. What is the type of deal you're going to get into? Have your financial records ready to go at all times. I mean, if you can work with a broker in your market to kind of get pre-qualified, that's always helpful. And that could be just off of your own financial information. And then they say, hey, it looks like you're light on your cash flow, but your other income is really supportive of this deal. So I think it tends to vary depending on the size of deal that you're trying to get into. What else would you add to that?
Yeah, I'll add that having a multitude of lenders available for that is huge. So we, not only just banks and kind of agency for multifamily on the non-recourse side, we do work with some debt funds who have maybe slightly above market pricing, but they can get comfortable with some of these weirder scenarios with a little bit higher leverage and, not getting unlimited guarantees from everybody and over 20% ownership and those kinds of things. So we add value in that scenario, but just off the beaten path type of lenders where you might pay 4.25% instead of 3.5% or something. But it makes the deal go, and there's probably some interest only in there, and it might be non-recourse or potential for recourse burn off from maybe some of the principals who would be willing to step up and guarantee. And the other thing I'll add, because we have a live deal right now where it is kind of a first syndication deal, but cash can solve a lot of the guarantee scenarios. So it's like, hey, we've got an investor who doesn't want to provide a PG, but hey, he'll throw $1 million in the bank, and that goes a long way. From
so just putting money with the lender, or
non-collateralized
account at the bank that's financing it, and then they took off the PG.
Yes.
And $1 million was how much of the loan? What percentage?
So I think
let's say it's a $5 million loan. So is that 20%? So 20% of the total loan?
We've seen anywhere from 20 to 25% of the loan amount, which we feel is heavy.
That's
but
pretty
even
heavy.
Just 12 months of debt service, P&I, and an account moves the needle for lenders. Absolutely.
Really, just putting that in an account will burn off the full PG?
In some scenarios, absolutely.
Yeah.
Or you have a mixture of, hey, these two principals are providing guarantees and they total something like 30% of the total ownership, and then someone steps up and says, I'll put 12 months of debt service in an account. And
then after the 12 months, can they remove it?
Yeah. It's not even collateralized typically. It's just, hey,
those are some great
found deposits. Banks lending off deposits.
Great examples.
Wow, and I guess, Chris,
helpful.
every scenario is so different. And I know that's a very generic response, but is it a stabilized property? Is it a value add property? Sure. All of those questions we'd want to get answered before we could,
But this is what I think is so fascinating about commercial lending is it's not black and white, cut and dry like that's residential conventional financing is, which, hey, you check the boxes, you're a W-2, you got work history, great. Mm-hmm. Oh, you don't? Probably no then or a headache, as Terrance was mentioning a few minutes ago. All right, so I want to pivot to, we got some great YouTube questions I feel behind on, guys. So we were talking to William and Marcus with Spearhead Mortgage, and we're going to do some rapid fire questions here from our Bigger Pockets YouTube community. As a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, our first show drops this Thursday, June 3rd, and that's going to be with Sterling White, who's a fellow Bigger Pockets contributor. Terrance, I go live at 2 p.m. We would love it, and we'd appreciate it as a big thank you if you come out to that show, support us, like us, comment it, and make sure that first show was Sterling, then Robert Martinez, then Rod Cleef, and then Dan and Kyle. Come out to like those shows. We would greatly appreciate with some love. Like the channel or subscribe to the channel, thumbs up, and leave us a comment. All right. Adrian says, what is the best commercial loan with rehab wrapped into the loan? So to me, this sounds like I know it's a very tricky question. Let's say a classic value add multifamily. You buy a multifamily, there's upside in rents. They can go in there and do some stuff.
$8 million purchase, $5 million loan, just right down the middle of the fairway.
Right down the middle of the fairway. Sure. Great sponsor behind it, I'm sure. Yeah. What we would typically do is either look at maybe a local or a regional bank for a play like this and look to enhance the loan with some interest only financing for the first part of the term. And then as the property matures and becomes stable and leased up, look to go into a fixed conventional P&I type of repayment structure. That could also be achieved in a private financing setting too. So like we were talking about, paying above market rate, depending on what your goals are behind the recourse scenario of it. There might be a way to kind of eliminate some of your personal liability if you considered private financing on that. And then once you achieved your lease up and your stabilization, then you can consider going a more conventional route, or with your new experience, you can even consider some agency financing.
All right.
That could work, huh?
Yeah, that all works.
But of course, it depends on the 5 C's, right?
Well, it depends on, who else is behind the deal,
Yeah.
and, what's this collateral? Look, you're right, the 5 C's.
I'll
all day.
preface everything really by saying what's the borrower's priority, because we truly want to keep that in the front of our minds as we're going to get, financing for people. Is the priority maximum leverage? Is it maximum cash flow? Is it lowest rate? Is it longest fixed term on the back end after the rehab's done? I mean, those all play into which lenders we're going to go get term sheets from. So,
And the first sentence you had on that sentence and your response was you'd go with a regional or local bank. So why in that question was the first answer local and regional versus agency? What tips you off to where you're like, okay, I'm going to go local and regional bank versus an agency lender?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. An agency lender is going to monitor the deal pretty much from the time of acquisition all the way through your lease up. And they're going to want to see you performing throughout the whole loan, meaning that you're cash flow positive. What some of the, and those programs really just don't allow for a proper lease up. Like I understood that question, at least. The way I understood that question is maybe they're going to be taking some rent roll risk by letting some tenants vacate while they're improving the property. And maybe during those times you wouldn't see cash flow positive, but that the outlook looks strong. So in that scenario, a lot of the local and regional banks have programs for that. They understand it. They think it benefits their market, and it usually does. So they have some more skin in the game to offer those type of terms where really they know that you're servicing the debt, of course, through alternative ways and not through the cash flow of the property always, or at least 100% of the cash flow. So that would lead me towards those type of programs or those type of lenders.
And to piggyback off that, I'd say leverage is another big one. Historically, I think the agencies have been pretty good at leverage. They've sort of backed off of that leverage position over the course of, COVID and whatever. But we do see some lenders pushing loan to cost up 75, sometimes 80%, if the pro forma of the property will support it.
Yeah, last year we did several deals loan to cost 80% of total cost in the middle of COVID, full rehab. And you're absolutely right. I mean, when we were looking at agency, they wanted 12 months interest reserve. And I think part of the rent roll as well, it ended up being like closely 15% of the total equity raise they wanted in reserve there, which was an insane number. I mean, you're talking like $300,000 or $400,000 they wanted sitting in the bank. It just didn't make sense. And you're paying interest on that money. You have investors, they want to prep. So those things made it really, really difficult to do an agency loan last year. So I'm interested to talk about that more later of how those terms have changed.
Sure.
All right. So 2 comments here from Yehosef. Hopefully I pronounced your name right. So going back a few minutes to clarify, when it comes to putting in non-collateralized money in the bank, if you say you put in 12 months worth, that will remove the personal guarantee.
Property dependent.
In some situations,
cash flow dependent, absolutely. Personal balance sheet dependent. But yeah, I think that's a good bargaining point if you're going to go to your local lender and you want to start negotiating ways to either whittle down your recourse or go full non-recourse, is absolutely come in with a substantial amount of cash. 12 months seems to be a good enough number that says we can some hiccups in the performance of the property and you still know where you're getting paid.
So the scenario I'm thinking about is actually a couple of guys who are doing a build, ground up construction, multifamily property, and they're syndicating the deal. The 2 individuals who are providing guarantees only total about 30% of the total, ownership percentage, but they do have an investor who's willing to stand up and say, okay, I can throw some cash at the institution if that helps move the needle. And he's probably throwing numbers out there now, but I think he's something like 10% ownership. And so to avoid, to get the bank comfortable without a full personal guarantee, they'll have some cash in the bank, and it's a non-collateralized account in the sense that it's not frozen.
Mhm.
Now the bank would expect those deposits to stay there until construction is done and, you know, the property's starting to stabilize. But, you know, that's in a syndication type of scenario that has moved the needle for this lender and enabling them to do the deal without, you know, at more than 50% of the ownership as full personal guarantors.
That's a great idea. I've never heard of that, and I've never had a lender suggest that. You know, typically when I was doing deals on my own and doing heavy value add, you know, we just PG'd everything, and it was never an option like, hey, put a couple hundred in the bank and, you know, you will burn this off or we'll reduce, you know, or anything like that. So I think that's a great bargaining chip and something I'm going to try next time I go to get a loan on a value add deal. I mean, that's phenomenal. If you can get the right.
I'm not sure your bank will ever bring that up to you.
Yeah.
They will always want to wrap
Right.
their arms around whatever's available.
Yeah.
But that's, you know, again, something that we can kind of help negotiate on.
It's a really good idea.
Structure.
That's great.
All right. So a follow-up question on here from Joseph is, how do you get non-recourse funding if it's your first syndication?
Yeah, I would say there's a pool of lenders that just strictly do non-recourse financing at above market rate interest collections. So what you're looking at is probably a private funding source that's going to allow for non-recourse. And to be honest, a lot of private funding sources, they want no business in tying up a personal guarantee. For them, it just doesn't make sense in their model to even underwrite personal guarantees. So there's many groups out there that are strictly based around the collateral, understanding your pro forma. And so there's a pool of lenders out there, usually in, I would say, second or third tier type of pricing. So, you know, anywhere from, 5% interest in today's market up to, you know, double digit interest for sure.
And so that's non-agency lenders, right?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
And there's a nuance to that question too, where agency, even if it's your first syndication deal, if you've owned multifamily in the past for at least a couple of years, you are eligible for agency lending. And, you know, you're talking out of the gate, non-recourse financing there, so that syndication really is neither here nor there. You know, from an agency perspective, as long as the property is solid and you've got the experience managing multifamily, true multifamily 5+ units in the past, that's something that's out there for you.
Okay. So moving on to some other questions here. Mac says, what route would you recommend for getting a 20-year term loan on $1 million multifamily property without having a W-2? So a couple layers to that question there. So wants to get a 20-year term on $1 million property, but no W-2.
Yeah, I mean, is there other income going on there? And what does the property look like? Are kind of my two first questions. I'd say, you know, I'd say 20-year fixed rate term is going to be pretty hard to come by. You're usually seeing 30-year AMs with maybe a maximum of 10-year fixed rate, you know, options on something like that. You know, that's my opinion.
If the property's performing, I mean, there's some to get him close to his 20-year goal. You know, there's an 18-year fixed program in the agency that maybe he can consider. Just with his property has to perform well, obviously being on that tight of an amortization schedule. I mean, that's sometimes the reason why we're just always suggest a 30-year amortization anyway, just to have that cash flow relief. And if you choose to prepay your loan early, you can do that with your cash flow savings. But if his property performs, he could surely speak to a local bank there and just address his non-W-2 situation right out the gate. And hopefully he's got other income outside of the property that will help withstand his credit file.
And I'll pose a question back, which is, you know, is the hold strategy truly 20 years? And we talked a little bit before the show started about prepayment penalties and how those can affect, you know, I mean, typically even in owner occupied, you know, financing situations where we're having people ask us about, you know, what's the longest fixed term I can get? And it's like, okay, well, you know, why? You know, I mean, we see people asking, you're inevitably between years 7 and 10, kind of either going back and refinancing that for cash out to buy something else, or someone's knocked on their door. It's appreciated enough that, you know, they want to get out of that thing. And so you really want to be cognizant in those scenarios of super long-term financing what the prepayment penalty is going to be.
But if it's truly a long-term hold for this gentleman and he can take advantage of these low interest rates for the next 20 years and fix something, that's a brilliant move. So,
But a great thing I hear you guys often talk about to answer these questions. Well, it's almost like peeling back an onion with the investor. It's like, well, let me ask, like, what's the goal here? What's this? And then you are really trying to understand what the borrower wants, which I think is important for, lenders, brokers, everyone. But hey, really get in the source, really get in the heart. What matters to you? What do you want? What are your goals? And then we can find a lending product that aligns to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a great takeaway for people is really have that defined. So when you do get to talk to lenders like you guys, for example, they come out and say, hey, here's what I want. Here's what I'm going for. And you can give them a reality check for, hey, here's what you can do, but keep this, and this in mind because we can move these around.
And I think part of the key here and the punchline for everyone listening is that you need to know your terminology and know what you're really asking for. When Mac is asking this question, I'm actually reading that he wants a 20-year AM schedule. And is that possible versus a 20-year fixed rate?
Oh, okay.
And so, but exactly what you guys said is maybe understanding that, hey, 25 or 30-year AM schedule might be actually be better because you can still pay it off in 20 if you want. Because there's that school of thought,
Absolutely.
Dave Ramsey, disciples where you want to pay off your house and put on a smaller AM schedule. Mm-hmm. So like 10 or 15 years. Sure. So maybe Mac is thinking that I have $1 million property. I can pay it off in 20 years. I own it free and clear in 20 years. And so understanding that you can get an AM schedule that's 30 years, which will allow you much more flexibility and actually allow you to get a better loan. And then you can fix it for, that's a totally different question. How many years? Yeah. How many years fix can you get versus how many year of an AM schedule? Because you actually want a more aggressive AM schedule or longer period versus fixed rate. I agree.
For cash flow, right?
Yeah.
And
for cash flow,
we would assume would be a priority. To Mac's point, though, he might be able to negotiate a better interest rate by taking down a rapid payoff.
Yeah.
Right. So, again, we would just want to dig into his priorities, and we would come up with the proper game plan, no doubt.
All right. Well, Bigger Pockets, we got time for one more question. I'm going to wrap up our live and take a quick break and record our full depth interview. We'll give more tips on lending, their background, but also talk about two very interesting deals. One's really helped a family who owned 7 fourplexes refinance into agency non-recourse debt, which I found very fascinating from what we talked about last week. And also some very creative financing for a 270-unit apartment building in Tampa, Florida, with a sophisticated investor they're able to put together. So some really great deal studies we'll be doing here in a few minutes. But the last question, William and Marcus, is from Bradley Martin. Bradley says, I've done a few small multifamily properties. How big or how many units do you recommend going for the first commercial deal?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all about your comfort level. I don't know if you're self-managing those or if you're having third-party management. It can certainly get overwhelming going from, say, 5 units to 100. But if you're using third-party management and willing to absorb that cost and in the cash flow and kind of out of your pocket in a sense, that you could probably step into some larger properties. Now, again, it sort of depends on your background and how many units you own now. But I would say that, if we do see oftentimes people going from maybe, 10 units to 20, 30 units, or if you have 15 to 20 units, you can step into a 40. So maybe double up. I don't think that's a rule, but maybe double up is something that, would be within the wheelhouse from a comfortability level, from a lender's perspective.
Yeah. And if maybe not a lot has changed on your personal balance sheet, when you have a steady job or something, then you don't want to just maybe go shoot for the moon for say, and you're not syndicating, then maybe you just do a small step up and just continue to add the number of doors to your portfolio and hopefully find more creative and easier financing down the road. But surely if you're going from, I know he says multifamily, I just don't know if that's 2 units or 5 units, if we're talking about kind of maturing from residential financing to commercial financing.
Let me time out. What's the difference between residential commercial financing? What's the divide?
Yeah, 1 through 4 units would be typically residential financing. Anything 5 and above, there are commercial loans available for single family type of loans. So the 1 through 4 stuff, but that comes into play typically on a pretty sophisticated portfolio of somebody who has 10 or more type of those 1 through 4s.
Okay. All right. William, Marcus, Terrance, it's been a great Q&A. We've gotten some great feedback from people here. I do want to share some of these comments. So Sean says, picking up some breadcrumbs wherever you guys go, learning so much. Thank you, Sean. We appreciate that. But Sean, everyone else out there, please do us a quick favor. Give us a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave us some positive feedback in the YouTube comments here. It energizes us. Terrance and I love seeing it. So please, please, please give us that feedback. All right. So if people want to learn more about you guys, where can they go to and learn more about William and Marcus and what Spearhead Mortgage does?
Yeah, our website is spearheadmortgage.com. We have some recently closed transactions on that site. Gives you guys a bio on us a little bit, or just call us. We're happy to talk through scenarios. If you're gearing up for something, we're always happy to have those preliminary conversations and talk more in depth about what your priorities are, because we do feel like that drives a lot of where your deal is going to go. Figuring out how you're looking at your investments and your hold periods and what financing is available. We really kind of got to dig into the weeds, and we're happy to look at OMs and tell you how we think the financing is going to pencil out.
Awesome.
That's it.
Guys, thank you so much. Terrance, another great show, man.
That was
Thank
great.
you guys.
Thanks, guys, for being here.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you guys for having us.